Good afternoon, my name is Milliken. I'm very honoured to be here, and as Johan said at the beginning, we did meet a long time ago when Johan was composing for the Ensemble Moderne, and I'm delighted that our meetings and collaboration has lasted until even today. So my topic today is, I'm going to just ask about this breathing, because if I continue to do that, it's going to be annoying. Okay, so how's that? Is that okay? Yes. Good, okay. The topic that I'm going to talk about today is participatory composition, sharing the pie. What I meant about sharing the pie is actually the question of sharing authorship or not, which is perhaps seemingly a contradiction because traditionally composers are fairly solitary creatures. Participatory, by that I mean taking part in a type of composition that engages socially and relationally with others in a democratic and inclusive practice. So the topic that I'm taking on, participatory composition, sharing the pie, is actually a proposal. It's a suggestion of a particular type of practice that composers may consider. It also reflects my history as a composer, the type of practice I've been engaged in, which, to quote John Toussaint, in fact, has seemed to me also to be a continuum in my practice as a composer between composing in solitary tower and composing with other people and all the very many varied facets of possibilities of collaboration or participation that exist in that line or that circle of continuum. So last week I was at the Venice Biennale to perform, and I went to watch the show across the way at the German Pavilion. Or perhaps I went to perform there, and I'll explain why. The Germany's entry is entitled Faust by Anna Imhoff, and it's a 4-hour immersive performance for spectator and performer creators. In the words of the Biennale program, it features a cast of aloof, androgynous performers activating the space by singing, headbanging, dancing, wrestling, playing music, climbing up walls, and perching on pedestals as living sculptures. The performers are not characters, in the words of the director. They do in fact play themselves, which brings an interesting dilemma for the audience. Are we, as an audience, only spectators, or are we playing ourselves, the spectators? This questions the fabric of tradition by which we either listen or perform. Both modes were defined by Thomas Torino in the Politics of Participation as either participatory, which is open to and inclusive of all, or presentational, whereby the division between spectator and artists exists. A more in-depth, and I find a very beautiful definition, is provided by Umberto Eco in The Open Work, where he says both cases of participatory or presentational with the division can be seen as different manifestations of the same interpretative attitude. Every reading, contemplation, or enjoyment of a work of art represents a tacit or private form of performance. So in fact, how I interpret that is to say, yes, we do still have a dividing line between spectator and performer, or spectator and composer, but there is a common or shared bond. The genre of participatory visual artworks asks questions that musicians and especially composers may be interested to address. If the line between composer and spectator becomes less distinct, does this change the way contemporary music is perceived or perceived? If the line between becomes more flexible, in fact, breaking down the divide, creating sometimes a magical uncertainty or ambiguity, where is the line? The divide? Is it safe or unsafe? Time, spatiality, audience involvement and participation are all becoming new vantage points of perceiving and of agency by performers, creators and spectators alike. From the perspective of the composer, this breakdown of divide between spectator and composer or performer, because in fact I'm implying, if I say spectator and performer, I'm actually implying the agency of the composer in that act. If this invites the inclusion of the otherwise classically solitary profession of composition into a relational social fabric or network. The sociologist Nicolas Bourriaud, in his book on relational aesthetics, refers to participatory acts within the arts as being a set of artistic practices which take as their theoretical and practical point of departure the whole of human relations and their social context, rather than an independent and private sphere. So this is the point of view and the reason why I took in my topic of participatory composition, sharing the pie. Inherent to the idea of participatory composition is the notion of collaboration and sharing authorship. It also implies coming to the table to share that pie and entering into a discourse at the table. When the aspect of the relational between spectator and composer is raised, it is in fact, at the moment, visual artists, as we see in many international art fairs like Venice Biennale. It is the visual artists that enjoy an ease with this form. They promote dialogue, invite other ideas, introduce democratic guidelines to the process of making. I'm thinking, for example, or I would refer to, or like to, refer to the Green Light workshop by Oliver Eliasson, also at the Venice Biennale, and his partners. They collaborated at the Biennale to design a workshop whereby migrant participants and public are invited together to fabricate green light structures. These structures are then later sold, and the money is used to be put into an NGO body who work with teaching language to migrants. Eliasson says the Green Light Workshop is an act of welcoming, addressed both to those who have fled hardship and to the residents of the cities receiving them. He also says in an interview, which I've transcribed, that he sees it as a work of art. It is also about creativity, about truth, about civic society. So it's about an environment of the workshop, which I hope gives this quality of a mix of data, of science, of social science, and also what I believe in from art, like aesthetics, hospitality, the shaping of space, the spirit of the environment, and collaboration, depending on the design, the shape of the green lamp, the motivation for the workshop, and so on. For composers as artists, the entrance into collaborative dialogue and participatory composition can bring a certain sense of unease. In their collaborative essay on composition and collaboration, Luke Wilson and Sam Hayden both agree that it is probable that collaboration, whether within music or within other artistic disciplines, may be more difficult for composers than other individuals, even though the composers will need a certain sort of role versatility to negotiate their own decision-making within their artistic agency. He also goes on to state that certain sorts of collaboration between composers seem to work well in a type of non-hierarchical situation, but as soon as there is a bit of hierarchy involved, there's the point made that probably most composers would rather be dead than have to collaborate, which I think is very extreme. But otherwise, in the essay, Luke Wilson and Sam Hayden were very moderate in their suggestion that collaboration could be a feature of the practice of a composer. Possible reasons for this uneasiness of sharing authorship, and please remember, it is a proposal from me, this possibility of sharing authorship, not a must. But I am drawing from my experience, so I will continue. The possible reasons for unease I would suggest are that, firstly, simply the idea of sharing authorship. I think composers will agree when you have an idea for a sound or a particular solution, it's somehow, I don't know, is it a flock of sharks or a shoal of sharks wouldn't stop you from wanting to realize this idea. So there's a certain sort of control that composers need and must have to actually carry out the this absolutely strong idea or sound, this ephemeral sound that they wish to bring. And as we said, it is a case of building pebbles, so you have to keep the concentration of building that. So the idea of sharing authorship and maybe having to concede that someone else has an idea for that solution, which is totally different to what you had, and letting go of that solution that you had and considering the other, is an act of magnitude, I'd say. There is a fear of standards falling because, in fact, participation and collaboration in composition can also be with non-musicians, perhaps with people in vastly different areas. So there is a worry, I think, that that pure search for an abstract composition that only has its raison d'être at this time, at this moment with you, this composer, is could also bring unease. There's also a recognition, I think, when you start to collaborate with other people, that you need to acquire another skill set, as the compositional areas that you move into might border on social or educational areas. There's also the practical issues of what co-authoring entails, and the skill sets needed to negotiate collaboration, and also two last points. As composers, there is sometimes a push and pull between addressing abstraction as a basis for your composition or the narrative, and I think this happens also more in opera, where a type of dramatization includes the question of narrative. Roland Barthes says, all classes, all human groups have their narratives. Narrative is international, transhistorical, transcultural. It is simply there, like life itself. And certainly in projects where I have been involved in, where it's a collaborative composition or a shared authorship, narrative is that, the storytelling is that very, very common sense that we have, that we share. And it might move into abstract areas, but narrative does play an important part there. The last question is it still art? I believe that as artists, we do approach questions and we do approach artistic endeavors as artists. That's what we practice in our life. So if we go into a certain situation or a context of shared authorship, we should come in as artists. Claire Bishop, who's written wonderfully about participatory visual arts, makes the point, if relational art produces human relations, then the next logical question to ask is, what type of relations are being produced, for whom, and for why? Now, this is the essential question, I think, if you are considering entering a shared authorship space or a participatory compositional space, is what is the context? Who is asking me to do this, or am I doing the asking? Am I, in fact, the person doing the invite, doing the invitation? How many people? What sort of group are we working with? Where is there? Are these people coming from a specific background? What is the stuff of our project? And I think all of those really dictate the context and actually also pull the fabric of composition together. Jacques Rancière, in The Emancipated Spectator, says, what the artist does is to weave together a new sensory fabric. Weaving this fabric means creating a form of common expression or a form of expressions of community. The earth song and the cry of humanity. That's a very beautiful quote. And I think in the sense that when we are sharing authorship, I think it's great to remember that it is evolving out of this, a piece of work, a collaboration, a participatory work that does address something of our human narrative, and as such we come away richer. Now, I hope that's not one of, having said that, I hope that's not one of those dreadful sentences that one does say on a grant. But having done many of these projects, I feel that it has enriched my life as a composer. And it's this aspect that I would like to, or that I am, or that's the reason why I'm actually talking to you about it. I think with a sense too of perhaps illuminating this particular type of agency for young composers who have perhaps not met this type of practice before. So I'd like to now just talk about a few projects that I've been involved in. Now, why does that not change? It's supposed to now jump on magically.
You may have to restart your presentation.
Okay. So that involves going down. And that involves, do I have to totally restart it? So I quit it, right? And then I will now, excuse me, this is a drastic moment in a talk, which I hate, is when the performance, no, that's not it either, when the performance sort of suddenly comes to a halt, but we will get there. So thank you for that tip. I'm restarting. Here we go. Oh, I'm just going to leave the blurb. It will take too long now too. No, it's still not doing it. So I'll just do it. So I think I just said before in that beautiful quote that it is about whom you're working with, what is the context, and that you will find creates the narrative for your work. In this type of participatory composition, I go from the perspective or the lens of an artist, a composer, but the work will touch on many different areas. The first piece I'll tell you about, it is called Brass and Bells. It was composed for the small town of Wismar in the north of Germany, and I worked with the young members of the youth orchestra there, as well as using the bells of the town, and so I made a whole scape of the bells. And these bells transpired through the church, and the performers walked through the space, performing a musical structure that imitated the bells. And I would not say that this is particularly a participatory composition, but it is a composition that involved a spatial aspect that in a way very much, for a rather, I must say, stilted opening to a festival, suddenly, I think, I felt brought a sense of uncertainty to the audience, definitely. Having these brass players weave in and out of them with this wonderful coulisses of bells from the city. A very much more immersive project I carried out over 5 years, going back each year to Japan after the earthquake. Now, I went to North Japan, to the area of Tohoku, and obviously this Tohoku area was badly affected by the earthquake. And so I was meeting with people from the community who were basically rebuilding their lives. And so obviously, strongly the context of this project directed the way that the whole collaboration and participation occurred. I worked with local community choirs, you can see right up the top, and it was very interesting to see or to notice their response, because they had been very used to just sitting in chairs or in a row, and we were doing many other things. We were singing and making gestures and speaking up messages, because the project was about messages for one another. And in the beginning, yes, there was a certain unease, but I think there's always a little bit of unease in a type of ambiguous situation. So I worked with wind bands, and also I did the presentation presentation at the end, which was a very interesting presentation because it seems frontal there, but in fact we started the whole thing with the brass band installation in the Buddhist temple garden, and we had everyone come out for that. And that's pretty much a rigmarole, I have to say, because it's shoes off here and not shoes on here, and then therefore here and go here, and then again shoes on. So it was a sort of ritual of shoes on and shoes off, and the sound outside the space and the sound heard from within the space outside. And that was a very interesting idea for them. And the other thing that was quite beautiful was that the messages that were told were messages of rhythms of Morse code. There were messages of semaphore alphabet with signs, lights, written messages on a screen, a multimedia screen, and also simple messages that were spoken by community leaders of hope and healing and solidarity. Now, this person who just did this, I'm actually going to have to go to my other keynote one because otherwise I won't have any, so I need to go out of here. Yes, sorry about that. And I need to go to the keynote one. So can you do what you did? Oh, thank you. There we go. Now we're back on track. So this was the brass installation out in the garden of the temple. The next year we did, in the same area, I worked together in collaboration with an English artist, Chris Wainwright, and we did another concert in the temple, but we also went down to the beach. And the beach had taken on a rather sinister aspect for the city people living in Kamaishi, because there were so many bodies that had washed up on shore, because of this aspect of seeing the ocean rise up and engulf your city. No one really liked going down to the beach. So we, for that reason, did a very beautiful installation by Chris involving lights and time exposure photography. And it was a lot of fun. We worked with fishermen, we worked with people from the choirs again, from the local wind band groups. The wind bands again played by the sea, and then we did the light choreography. Chris did his photographs, and that was the result of that. That's just the score that we had. It's quite an open score. And of course, as a composer, whatever context you are working in, when it is a type of participation, the look of your score simply changes. Out of this experience of going to Kamaishi in Tohoku, I composed a series of cards which were in memory of many of the people who lost their lives there. And these cards can be interpreted by musicians, by audience members, by filmmakers. I did a short presentation, or there was a short presentation by the IEMA in Tokyo. And afterwards I took this project to the University of Griffith in Queensland, where I come from. And this time we took the cards, and there was a filmmaker who made a film to it, and the participants, or the players, performers of Memorial, actually also created their own cards and another whole set of pieces to be played with its own name. So another work that I'd like to present, it's a work on this, on that sort of circle of continuum, a work that I must say I tore my hair out personally and alone and in solitude for many, many months, and it's a work for orchestra. However, I wanted to share this orchestral piece in a different way. I did use text from one of the community leaders in Kamaishi, whose messages were about family and the support that family give in times of crisis. The message was about love of mountains and of sea, which of course in that particular circumstance had a very strong meaning, and in the belief in the future. And so the third movement was totally the text by Akiko Iwasaki. I also discussed with the education department of that orchestra of doing a education project. This Earth Plays is in 4 movements. Each movement takes or is based around a different spot on the Earth. Pingvalir, where the laws of Iceland were read. Epidauros, where there was drama and healing. Stones in Japan, so it's, the stone is a theme that runs through, but it's also human endeavour culture, which is manifested in word, either in theatre or in reading of law or in memorial. And the 4th movement was Radio City, New York, honouring the fact that it opened as an attempt to show films and culture at a very affordable price for New Yorkers back then in the 30s, which was a very important thing to do. This is part of Earth Plays. I'll just run through these projects very quickly now. The Comforty project was a project carried out in townships in South Africa, in Kraaifontein, which is just outside of Cape Town. And it was, I was taken there by an organisation called Umkalo, and this organisation was aiming at bringing opera back into the lives of people everywhere as a type of music narrative. We created songs and stories about the lives there, and my part as a composer was to work with the young choir students to help them shape their songs. I did writing workshops with them where there was just flow of writing, then shaping till we got to the text for the song, then we made the songs, and then I wrote single compositions for the soloists who took part in that. I don't know if that plays. Oops. Okay, let me get a small description. So as you probably noticed, one very important composer there, who I neglected to mention, is Handel. It was taken from their Messiah. So in that, we had a director who worked on the actual dialogue. I worked on the songs with the young choir students, and I did the arias. So as you can see too, from this type of project, a completely type of different compositional skill comes to the fore. And that's what I meant before, that in the sense of sharing authorship also means going with the flow of it, going to that table of that particular discourse and entering into that particular discourse, which might lead you in a different compositional direction than when you just have the task or the wonderful commission, you know, to write for that orchestra or that particular group, and you can let your mind fly. So it's a type of giving up, but it's a type of giving into. So I don't feel personally that there's much that I give up compared to, and now I'm going to do one of those evil things, compared to what I received. So, yes, other participatory performances. I try to weave things in when I want to. Innsbruck Lied, I've started a type of series of city songs. So I go to a city, generally to an institution there. One was the Elbphilharmonie, one was in Innsbruck, and we create a city song that I then afterwards arrange. But the song itself is created by different varied participants. In one instance it was a senior choir, in another instance it was school children. So the waving for orchestra was for a youth orchestra, and then I had a section for mouth organs, and a school came and played a very beautiful middle section, various groups of mouth organs in the new Elbphilharmonie. So, look, I think if I kept on talking, I'd just repeat myself, but I want to just, for my last thing, say this is a proposal, it's a suggestion, it's a possible mode of practice for a composer. It does go into areas that are maybe causing a bit of unease because one is not sure about the mode of collaboration. But if I can say anything peaceful, generally the attitude of curiosity and enjoyment of other people will lead you to the right thing to do in that moment, in that context. Listening is the other important factor that you need to bring with you. I think then I would finish now, and I'd be grateful for questions.
Thank you so much.